On a bright winter morning in Silverpine, Elias Mercer crossed Hawthorne Bridge expecting only silence. But beneath the frozen railings, a German shepherd lay collapsed beside the Lark River, barely breathing. Elias had spent years avoiding anything that could break his heart again. Yet one trembling paw pulled him back toward a promise he never said out loud. Soon, a poisoned dog, a weary veterinarian, and a wounded river would force an entire town to choose between comfort and truth. This is not just a rescue story. It is a story about what happens when mercy refuses to look away. Tell us where you're watching from. Leave your thoughts after the story, and please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers so we can keep creating more heartfelt stories like this. Elias Mercer ran before the town was fully awake. That was how he preferred Silverpine, Montana, half lit, half dreaming, before pickup engines coughed awake and diner lights turned gold behind frosted windows. At that hour, the world still belonged to small sounds. The hush of snow sliding from pine branches, the creak of old timber in the cold, the faint complaint of his boots striking the packed trail in a steady rhythm. Winter had made the town beautiful in a way that felt almost unfair. Every roof wore a clean white crown. Smoke rose from cabin chimneys in thin blue ribbons. The valley beyond the houses opened toward the Lark River, where the water moved beneath broken panes of ice, bright in places, shadowed in others, as if the river were keeping secrets under glass. Elias did not run because he was trying to outrun age. At 52, he knew age was not an enemy you defeated. It was a patient thing. It waited in the knees after a long climb, in the shoulder that ached before a storm, in the scar tissue that woke before the rest of him did. He ran because movement kept the past at a respectful distance, not gone, never gone, just far enough behind him that he could breathe. He wore a dark winter running jacket over a gray thermal shirt, black gloves, and a charcoal knit cap pulled low over his ears. His frame still held the evidence of old discipline. Broad shoulders, lean strength, a spine that did not easily bend. His face, long and weathered by sun and snow, carried lines that had not been placed there by laughter alone. His hazel-gray eyes, touched with green, watched the world the way some men listened for thunder. He had once served in the Navy SEALs. People in Silverpine knew that, though Elias rarely said it aloud. They also knew he had worked with K-9 units overseas, because old men at the diner enjoyed building legends out of half-facts, and because dogs in town tended to trust him faster than people did. He had a way of approaching animals without asking them to forgive the whole human race at once. But he had left that world behind, or at least he had packed it carefully in a locked room of himself and learned not to touch the door. Years of service had taught him many things. How to read a ridgeline, how to sleep lightly, how to keep his hand steady when everything in the body wanted to shake. But it had also taught him how easily living beings could be filed into categories: asset, liability, operational loss, acceptable risk. He had grown tired of that language, not angry in the loud way. Elias had never been a man who wasted anger on volume. His anger had settled deeper than that, down near the bone, where it became restraint. He had seen dogs that gave everything asked of them and were still discussed like gear. He had seen men treated the same way, useful until broken, honored in speech, discarded in practice. So he came to Silverpine, a small house near the tree line, a pickup older than some local marriages, a workbench, a stack of firewood, a path to run each morning, a life narrow enough to survive. The Hawthorne Bridge came into view as he rounded the bend past the old spruce grove. It was not a grand bridge, just weathered planks, iron bolts, and railings silvered by frost. It crossed a slow bend of the Lark River where the current pushed under the ice with a muffled sound, like a voice speaking through a closed door. Elias slowed as he reached the bridge. He always did. Not for any sentimental reason, he told himself. The boards were slick, the railing had a loose section near the middle. The wind moved differently over open water. Practical reasons? Sensible reasons. Still, every morning he paused long enough to look down. The river beneath was pale blue in the early light, with dark seams where the current had kept the ice from sealing over. Snow had gathered along the banks in soft shelves. Beyond the river, Silverpine rose gently into the morning, all white roofs and thin smoke, a town so pretty it could make a man forget that pretty things could rot underneath. He was about to continue across when he heard it. A scrape, small, weak, almost lost under the river's muted rush. Elias stopped. The sound came again. Not a branch, not ice shifting, not the skitter of a squirrel over bark. A claw against frozen earth. He moved to the railing and looked down toward the east bank. At first, he saw only snow and shadow, the tangled brown of winter brush, a broken shelf of ice near the waterline. Then something dark shifted beneath the bridge, barely more than a tremor in the white. Elias was already moving. He vaulted the low side of the trail where the slope dipped toward the riverbank, boots sliding a little as he descended. One gloved hand caught a sapling for balance. Snow broke loose under his heel and tumbled ahead of him in clumps. The cold came up from the river sharper here, wet and metallic. Halfway down, the smell reached him. Faint. Chemical. Wrong. He stopped for a fraction of a second. The river had always smelled of stone, pine, mud, and ice. This was different. Thin and bitter, like antifreeze spilled in a garage, hidden under the cleaner scent of snow. His eyes moved to the water. Near a cracked plate of ice, a faint blue-gray film slid along the surface, so delicate he might have missed it if the rising sun had not touched it at an angle. It moved with the current, there and not there, like a bruise drifting under glass. Elias did not name it. Naming too early was how people lied to themselves. He moved toward the sound. The German shepherd lay near the edge of the bank, half in the snow, half against a ridge of frozen mud. Male, maybe 4 years old. Black and tan, though the tan had darkened where water had soaked deep into the fur. His body was stretched awkwardly, one front paw extended toward the river as though he had tried to pull himself away, and failed. For one breath, Elias thought the dog was already gone. Then he saw the ribs move. Barely. A thin froth clung to the dog's muzzle. His nose was crusted with ice. One ear stood half raised, the other flat against his head, its edge marked by an old scar. His eyes were closed. His paws twitched once, scraping weakly against the snow. Elias dropped to one knee. "Easy," he said, though the dog had not struggled. His voice came out low, almost rough from the cold. He pulled off one glove with his teeth and pressed 2 fingers gently beneath the dog's jaw, searching through wet fur for the pulse. There, fast, weak, irregular, alive. The word struck him harder than it should have. For years, Elias had built his peace around careful distances. He helped when help was practical. He fixed Mara Whitcomb's backstep when it cracked. He shoveled the vet clinic's walkway when the snow got too deep. He donated money anonymously when ranchers could not pay for medicine. He did good things at arm's length, like a man leaving food at the edge of a forest for creatures he refused to tame. But this dog was not at the edge of anything. He was directly in Elias's hands. The shepherd's body shuddered, not a full convulsion, not yet, but a deep tremor that rolled from chest to flank. Elias leaned closer, scanning quickly. No obvious external wound, no broken limb visible. Wet fur, foam, cold exposure, possible toxin, possible ingestion. The list formed in his mind with the old efficiency he hated and trusted. The dog's eyelids fluttered. For half a second, his eyes opened. They were dark amber, unfocused, but aware enough to find Elias's face. No plea, no accusation, just a flicker of life, exhausted and stubborn, like a candle refusing the wind out of sheer bad manners. Something in Elias's chest tightened. "Well," he murmured, "you picked a terrible morning for a swim." It was not funny, not really, but the sound of his own voice steadied him, and maybe that was what humor was for, an old match struck in a cold room. He unzipped his running jacket and stripped it off, the cold biting through his thermal shirt at once. He wrapped the jacket around the shepherd's body, tucking the sleeves beneath the chest to hold warmth close. The dog gave a small, broken exhale. Elias looked back up the slope toward the trail and the bridge. His pickup was parked at the trailhead nearly half a mile away. For one narrow moment, his mind calculated the sensible options. Call first, stabilize here, get help down the bank, avoid moving a compromised animal too quickly. Then the dog's breathing hitched. A small sound escaped him, almost too faint to be called a whine. Elias stopped calculating. He slid one arm beneath the shepherd's chest, the other beneath the hips, careful not to twist the spine. The dog was lighter than he looked. Too light. Beneath the soaked coat, Elias felt the hard shape of ribs and the fragile heat still trapped at the core. "Stay with me," he said. The words left his mouth before he could stop them. They belonged to old rooms, old dust, old blood. Words he had sworn not to use again because sometimes the living did not stay, no matter how firmly you ordered them to. The shepherd's head lolled against his forearm. Elias climbed. The slope was steeper going up. Snow gave way beneath his boots. Twice he had to stop and brace his shoulder against a tree. Cold air burned in his lungs. The dog's weight dragged at his arms, not because he was heavy, but because a helpless body carries a different kind of gravity. By the time Elias reached the trail, his thermal shirt clung damply to his back. The bridge stretched ahead, empty and pale beneath the morning light. For a moment, the town beyond looked unchanged. Smoke still rose. Windows still glowed. Somewhere, a truck started with a stubborn cough. The world had no idea something had shifted. Elias carried the dog across Hawthorne Bridge, and beneath the planks, the Lark River whispered over stone and ice. At the trailhead, he laid the shepherd carefully across the back seat of his pickup and turned the heater high. His hands moved with practiced speed. Blanket from behind the seat. Emergency towel. Phone from the console. He called Lenora Vale. She answered on the fourth ring, voice thick with sleep but already suspicious. "Elias?" "I need the clinic open." A pause. Fabric rustled. "For you or an animal?" "Dog. Male German Shepherd. Hypothermic. Possible poisoning. Found him by the river." The sleep left her voice completely. "How far out?" 7 minutes. "Make it 5, but don't crash. I dislike paperwork before coffee." Despite everything, Elias almost smiled. "That your professional advice?" "My professional advice is keep him warm, don't force water, and stop talking so I can put on boots." The call ended. Elias looked in the rearview mirror. The dog lay still beneath the blanket and jacket, only the faintest rise of his chest proving the argument was not over yet. Snowflakes had begun to fall again, soft and slow, touching the windshield like ash from a bright white fire. He drove. Silverpine passed in quiet pieces. The closed hardware store, the old post office, Mara's diner, where a red neon coffee cup blinked in the window. Two bundled figures crossed the street, heads bowed against the cold. No one noticed the man gripping the steering wheel too tightly. No one saw the shepherd in the back seat, carrying a message from the river in his blood. Lenora's clinic sat at the edge of town, a low wooden building with green trim, a small porch, and a sign that read, Lark Valley Veterinary Care. The porch light was already on. Lenora stood in the open doorway wearing boots, dark pants, and a heavy cardigan thrown over pale blue scrubs. Her chestnut hair was twisted into a careless knot, several strands already escaping, as if even her hair had been called into emergency service against its will. She did not waste time greeting him. Inside. Elias carried the shepherd through the door. The clinic smelled of antiseptic, cedar shavings, old coffee, and something warm beneath it all. A bell above the door gave one small ring as they entered, cheerful in a way that felt almost rude. Lenora guided him toward the treatment table, her face calm but her eyes sharp. "Set him down gently." Elias did. Lenora moved with practiced grace, not hurried, never careless. She checked the dog's gums, pupils, temperature, heart rate. Her hands were slender, scratched at the knuckles, completely sure of themselves. Elias had seen those hands stitch a torn flank, soothe a terrified mare, and once throw a clipboard at a raccoon that had escaped into the supply cabinet. The raccoon had won the first round. Lenora had won the war. Now she frowned. How long was he out there? Don't know. Where exactly? East Bank below Hawthorne Bridge. Her eyes flicked up. He saw that she knew something before she said it. What? Lenora reached for a warming blanket. I've had 3 wildlife cases from that stretch in 2 weeks. A fox, waterfowl, 1 ranch dog from north of Millbend Creek. Same symptoms? Close enough to make me hate coincidence. She inserted an IV line with careful precision. But I'm not calling cause yet. Could be toxin exposure. Could be contaminated water, contaminated prey, runoff, old industrial residue. Could be more than one thing. He was near the water, Elias said. There was a film under the ice. Blue-gray. Lenora's mouth tightened, just slightly. Did you touch it? No. Good. Look at you, following instructions before I give them. It's unsettling. He looked at the dog instead of answering. The shepherd trembled as warmth began to work slowly through him. Lenora adjusted the flow of fluids, then listened to his chest. For several seconds, the only sounds were the low hum of the heater and the faint clicking of sleet against the window. Elias stood at the table, hands hanging uselessly at his sides. He hated that part. In crisis, he knew what to do. Carry, cut, bind, move, hold pressure, read terrain, give orders, take them. But here, in the clean light of the clinic, all he could do was watch a woman with a stethoscope fight for a dog whose name he did not know. Lenora glanced at him. You found him in time. Maybe. No, she said, softer now. You did? The shepherd's ear twitched at the sound of her voice. Then, slowly, painfully, his eyes opened again. This time, they found Elias, not Lenora, not the lights, not the window. Elias. The gaze was unfocused, clouded by shock and poison and cold, but it held for 1 second longer than it should have. A thin breath left the dog's muzzle. His paw shifted across the metal table until the claws touched Elias's bare wrist. It was barely contact, a whisper of weight, but Elias felt it all the way through him. He had not asked to be chosen, not by a dog, not by a town, not by whatever was happening beneath the frozen skin of the Lark River. Yet the paw stayed there, cold and trembling against him. Lenora saw it too. Her expression changed, not into surprise exactly, but into something gentler, something that knew better than to laugh at sacred little things just because they arrived covered in mud. He's fighting, she said. Elias swallowed. The dog had no name, no owner standing in the waiting room, no story anyone could tell yet. Just a scarred ear, a poisoned body, and enough stubborn life to reach for the man who had pulled him from the snow. Outside, Silverpine brightened under falling winter light. The town looked clean from a distance. White roofs, pine shadows, smoke lifting peacefully into the morning. But Elias kept seeing that blue-gray film sliding beneath the ice. He looked down at the shepherd's paw against his wrist. A life had fallen in front of him beside the river. Not an idea. Not a case. Not a problem to be handed off to someone with a title. A life. And in the quiet clinic, with Lenora moving beside him and the dog breathing hard under the warming blanket, Elias felt the old locked room inside himself open by an inch. He did not know yet what had poisoned the river. He did not know why animals were falling ill along its banks. He only knew that turning away would be its own kind of poison. And he had carried enough of that already. The German shepherd did not die before morning. That was the first miracle, though Lenora Vale refused to call it one. She had never trusted miracles that arrived without fluids, heat, medication, and someone staying awake long enough to notice when breathing changed. In her clinic, Grace wore latex gloves. Hope came through an IV line. Mercy smelled faintly of antiseptic and old cedar shavings. The dog lay on a padded recovery mat in the treatment room, wrapped beneath a warming blanket that hummed softly under the low yellow lights. Outside, Silverpine was still buried in winter. Snow pressed against the window ledges. The clinic sign creaked once in the wind, then settled. Inside, the world had narrowed to heart rate, body temperature, gum color, pupil response, and the fragile rise and fall of a poisoned animal's chest. Elias Mercer stood near the counter, arms folded, pretending he was not watching every breath. Lenora noticed, of course. She noticed nearly everything. A horse shifting weight off a sore hoof, a cat hiding pain beneath royal contempt, a rancher lying about how long his dog had been limping. Elias Mercer pretending distance was the same thing as control. "Still alive," she said, checking the monitor. Elias looked at her. "That your official diagnosis?" "It's my favorite one." She had changed into clean sage-green scrubs sometime after midnight, though her hair had given up on discipline entirely. Chestnut strands had escaped the low knot at the back of her neck and fallen near her temples. There was a smudge of something on her sleeve. Iodine, maybe coffee, possibly both. Her eyes were tired, but not dull. Lenora had the particular exhaustion of people who had chosen a life where sleep lost most arguments. Elias uncrossed his arms and stepped closer. "How bad?" Lenora did not answer quickly. She never gave comfort faster than facts allowed. "Bad enough that he should not have made it through the first 2 hours," she said. "But he did. His temperature is climbing slowly. Heart rhythm is still uneven, but steadier. He's dehydrated. Liver enzymes may be elevated. I'll know more when the blood work comes back from the regional lab." "You think poison?" "I think toxin exposure is likely." She lifted a small vial of blood, labeling it with careful handwriting. "But I don't think this was one drink of bad water and then collapse. His body looks like it's been fighting something for days, maybe longer." Elias looked down at the dog. The shepherd's coat was beginning to dry in uneven patches. Black across the back, tan along the chest and legs, the colors muddied by river water and old snow. One ear bore a small scar along the edge. His ribs showed more than they should have. Not starvation exactly, but depletion. The kind that came from moving too long without enough food, drinking where he could, surviving by inches. "He was out there a while," Elias said. "Probably." Lenora took a penlight from her pocket and checked the dog's eyes again. "He may have been drinking from the river more than once, or eating fish washed up near the banks, or walking through contaminated mud and licking his paws. Toxins don't always kick the door down. Sometimes they move in quietly and rearrange the furniture." The dog's eyelids fluttered at the light, but he did not fully wake. Lenora clicked the penlight off. "He needs a name." Elias gave her a flat look. "He needs a liver panel." "He can have both. I'm a generous woman." "He may have an owner." "He may." She set the penlight down. "But until someone comes through that door with proof and a better explanation than the river trying to murder him, he needs something better than the dog." Elias said nothing. Lenora studied the shepherd's fur, now showing a deep brown-black tone where the blanket did not cover him. "Bracken." Elias frowned. "Bracken?" "Those brown ferns that stay under the snow all winter, dead-looking, stubborn as sin, waiting for weather to change." The dog's scarred ear twitched. Lenora looked at Elias. Elias looked at the dog. The ear twitched again when Lenora said, "Bracken." A faint, almost treacherous softness moved through Elias's face. Lenora's eyebrow rose. "What?" he asked. "Nothing." "That eyebrow is not nothing. That eyebrow has solved crimes." "I believe it." She wrote Bracken on the temporary intake card. Elias did not object. He told himself that meant nothing. A name was a tool, a convenience. People named storms, too, and no one took them home afterward. Still, when Bracken breathed a little easier under the humming blanket, Elias felt the name settle into the room like a small fire catching. Lenora moved to a cabinet and took out several sterile containers. "I need clean samples from where you found him." "Water?" "Water, if you can get it safely. Snow from the bank. Mud if the ground isn't frozen solid. Anything with discoloration. But you stay on public access. No crossing fences, no wandering onto mine property, no hero nonsense." "I don't do hero nonsense." "You brought me a half-frozen German Shepherd before sunrise while wearing one thermal shirt and the expression of a man preparing to argue with God." "That was logistics." "That was pneumonia with boots." He almost smiled. Almost. The clinic's front bell rang before Lenora could press the point. A gust of cold slipped down the hall, carrying the smell of snow, frying bacon, and coffee strong enough to revive lesser mammals. "Mara," Lenora called without looking. "Don't use that tone with me," a woman's voice answered. "I come bearing soup and judgment." Mara Whitcomb entered the treatment room as if she owned the weather and had only stepped outside to scold it. She was short, round-cheeked, bundled in a brown wool coat, with a red scarf wrapped so dramatically around her neck that it looked ready for its own theater debut. Silver blonde hair peeked from beneath a knit cap, and her pale blue eyes missed nothing. In one hand she carried a red thermos, in the other a paper bag already fogging with heat. She looked at Elias first. "You?" she said. "Morning, Mara." "Don't morning me. Lenora says you went running by the river before dawn again. One of these days I'll find you frozen under that bridge. And then what? I'll have to stew you with potatoes so your shoulders don't go to waste." Lenora coughed into her sleeve. Elias accepted the paper bag because refusing Mara's food was less wise than wrestling a bear. "Thank you." "That's better?" Mara's gaze softened when she saw the dog. "Oh, poor lamb." "He's a German Shepherd," Elias said. "All suffering creatures are lambs before breakfast." Mara stepped closer, her humor lowering itself respectfully near the edge of concern. "He going to make it?" Lenora answered. "He made it through the night. That counts." Mara nodded once, as if filing the fact in a private chapel. Then she glanced at the labeled vials, the sample containers, Elias's damp running shoes by the heater, and the map of the Lark River pinned on Lenora's side wall. Her face changed. Not much. Just enough. "Another one?" she asked. Elias looked at Lenora. Lenora did not answer. Mara exhaled through her nose. "That fox from Millbend was 2 weeks ago. Then Hank Dobbs's dogs. Then those ducks near the old culvert." She pressed her lips together. "People keep saying winter does strange things. I'm 61. I've seen winter do plenty. It doesn't usually poison everything with paws." Elias stepped closer to the map. "You saw something?" Mara looked toward the front room, as if checking whether the walls had developed ears. "Maybe." Lenora set the thermos on the counter. "Mara." "Don't Mara me either. I'm deciding whether I saw something useful or whether I'm just a nosy old woman with excellent eyesight." "You can be both," Elias said. She pointed at him. "That is why I tolerate you." Then she moved to the map and tapped a red-polished fingernail near the road that curved toward Evershade Mine. 3 nights ago, snow coming down sideways. I was closing the diner late because the Thompson brothers got into a debate about whether soup counts as a meal, which it does, because I said so. I saw a tanker truck go up this road. Lenora frowned. "At night? Near midnight? Logo?" "Couldn't see. Snow was thick, headlights low, but it wasn't a county truck, and it wasn't local fuel delivery. Too clean. Too quiet." Elias's attention sharpened. Mara noticed. "Don't go getting that look." "What look?" "The one men get right before they do something stupid and later call it necessary." Lenora murmured, "I know that look." Elias looked from one woman to the other. "I haven't done anything." "Yet," they said together. For a moment, even the clinic seemed to breathe easier. Then Bracken made a small sound. Not a bark, not a whine. A rough, broken exhale that caught in his throat. Elias moved before anyone asked him to. He knelt beside the mat as Lenora checked the IV line. Bracken's eyes opened halfway, cloudy and unfocused. His body trembled under the blanket. Elias placed one hand near the dog's shoulder, not touching at first, only offering warmth nearby. Bracken's gaze wandered, then found him. The room stilled. Elias had seen many kinds of recognition in dogs, the bright snap of obedience, the wary calculation of fear, the desperate searching of an animal in pain. This was different. Bracken looked at him as if trying to place a sound he had heard once in a dream. Elias lowered his voice. "You're all right." Bracken did not know the words, but he seemed to know the shape of the tone. His breathing eased by the smallest measure. Mara watched from beside the map, one hand over her thermos. "Well," she said softly, "that dog just made a decision." Elias did not look away from Bracken. "He's sedated." "I've known plenty of sedated men. None of them looked at me like that unless they owed me money." Lenora's expression did not tease this time. She adjusted the blanket, then said quietly, "Animals don't always understand rescue, but they remember steadiness." The word landed in Elias with more weight than it should have. Steadiness. He had spent years mistaking stillness for peace. He had built his life in Silverpine around not needing anyone too much and not being needed too deeply in return. But steadiness was not absence. It was presence under pressure. It was staying when a body on a cold riverbank had no strength left to ask. Bracken's paw shifted beneath the blanket. Elias let his hand rest lightly against the dog's shoulder. The shepherd closed his eyes again. Mara cleared her throat, suddenly very interested in unpacking soup. "All right. Nobody cry into the IV line. I brought chicken barley, and if any of you pretend you're not hungry, I'll become unpleasant." "You're already unpleasant," Lenora said. "Yes, but this would be organized." The morning stretched on. Lenora ran the in-house tests she could, documented symptoms, photographed Bracken's condition, and prepared the samples for the regional lab. Elias ate half a bowl of soup under Mara's supervision, then stood by the sink washing the container before anyone asked. Mara approved of this with the solemnity of a monarch granting land. By noon, Bracken's temperature had improved. Not enough. But enough to let Lenora breathe through her nose instead of holding each inhale at the edge of dread. She handed Elias a small insulated case containing sterile vials. "Exact location," she said. "Water if accessible. Snow from the bank. Any stained ice, but don't break through anything unstable. Wear gloves. Label everything. Take photos before you collect." "And Elias?" He looked at her. "No mine property. No fences, no lock gates, no chasing tanker trucks into the woods like a man auditioning for a bad cable movie." That was specific. "I know my audience." He took the case. Mara pointed her soup spoon at him. "And put on a real coat. You look like a heroic idiot, which is still an idiot." "Yes, ma'am." Elias stepped toward the treatment room door, then stopped. Bracken was awake again. Only barely. His head lifted no more than an inch from the blanket, but the effort cost him. His eyes locked on Elias, dark amber under heavy lids. He did not whine. He did not struggle. He simply watched the man who was leaving. Elias stood frozen in the doorway. The old part of him, the careful part, the part that survived by not letting roots grow too deep, told him to keep walking. The dog was safe with Lenora. The samples needed collecting. Action was easier than attachment, but Bracken kept looking, not pleading, holding. There was a difference, and Elias hated that he understood it. Lenora saw the hesitation. She said nothing. For once, no joke rose to fill the room. Elias walked back to the mat and crouched. "I'm coming back," he said. The words felt foolish, a promise made to a dog too weak to understand it. A small sentence, breakable as thin ice. Bracken's ear twitched. Elias let out a breath through his nose. "I'm coming back," he repeated, quieter. Only then did the shepherd lower his head. Mara's face had gone suspiciously soft. She ruined it immediately by saying, "Well, there it is. The dog owns him now." Lenora looked at Elias with that eyebrow again. Elias stood, clearing his throat. "Temporary arrangement." "Of course," Lenora said. Mara patted his arm as he passed. "That's what my third husband said about moving into my diner. He lasted 9 years and stole my best skillet." Elias pulled on his heavy coat from the hook by the door. Outside, the afternoon had turned bright and cold. The snow reflected sunlight so cleanly it almost hurt to look at. Silverpine looked peaceful, white roofs, green pines, chimney smoke, the gentle curve of the road leading back toward Hawthorne Bridge. But behind Elias, in the clinic with the yellow light, a poisoned dog slept under careful hands. And in his pocket, sterile vials waited like small glass questions. Elias stepped off the porch. He did not yet know what was wrong with the river. He only knew that Lenora was right. Bracken had not been poisoned by one unlucky drink. Something had been happening along the Lark, long enough for animals to fall ill, one by one, quietly enough for people to explain it away. Winter could hide tracks. Snow could soften edges. But Elias had spent half his life noticing what others missed. This time he would not trespass. He would not accuse. He would not become the kind of man who mistook force for truth. He would begin with water, and he would come back. By the fourth morning, Bracken no longer looked like a creature arguing with death. He still looked wounded by the argument. His ribs showed beneath the thickening fur. His movements were slow, careful, as if each step had to be negotiated with muscles that did not yet trust themselves. But the dull gray film had left his eyes, and when Lenora entered the recovery room, his scarred ear lifted before the rest of him did. "That," Lenora said, carrying a bowl of softened food, "is the ear of a patient with opinions." Bracken watched the bowl, then watched Elias. Elias stood near the doorway with his arms folded, wearing an olive field jacket over his combat shirt. The camouflage sleeves were mostly hidden beneath the coat, but the old discipline of the man remained visible in the way he stood. Not stiff, not relaxed, simply ready. Snow clung to his boots from the morning trail. "He has plenty of food," Elias said. "He has plenty of suspicion," Lenora corrected. "Food is innocent until proven otherwise." She set the bowl down near the edge of Bracken's mat and stepped back. Bracken lowered his muzzle, sniffed once, then lifted his head again and looked at Elias with the solemn disappointment of a judge hearing poor testimony. Lenora turned slowly. Elias looked away. "You did this," she said. "I did not." "You hand-fed him yesterday." "He wouldn't eat." "And now he has discovered room service." Elias stepped in, crouched beside the mat, and picked up a small portion of food with 2 fingers. Bracken leaned forward and ate, slow but willing. When Elias nudged the bowl closer, Bracken hesitated, then took another bite from the bowl itself. Not many. Enough. Lenora said nothing for a moment. Her expression softened in spite of herself. Trust did not enter animals like sunrise. It came in slivers. A bite from the hand. A blink held a second longer. A chin placed lightly on skin, not because pain had vanished, but because fear had grown tired of standing alone. Later that morning, Bracken placed his chin on the back of Elias's hand. It happened without ceremony. Elias had been sitting on the clinic floor beside the recovery mat, checking the labels on the sample vials Lenora had prepared. Bracken shifted, sighed, and lowered his muzzle until the weight rested against Elias's knuckles. Not heavy, not demanding, just there. Elias went still. Lenora saw it from the counter, where she was pretending to organize syringes that were already organized. She did not tease him. Some moments would wither if touched too quickly. Elias looked down at the dog's head against his hand and felt a strange embarrassment move through him, quiet and almost tender. Bracken was not healed. He was not safe in any grand sense. But he had chosen contact, and that choice made the room feel larger than it was. By noon, Elias had gone back to the river. He did not go with anger in his stride. Anger moved too fast and missed details. He went with an insulated case, a waterproof notebook, a small camera, gloves, and the patience of a man who had learned the hard way that truth often hid under ordinary surfaces. The Lark River curved through Silverpine like a blue vein beneath white skin. From Hawthorne Bridge it looked almost holy in the pale winter sun. Ice stretched in broken plates along the banks. The current slipped through dark seams, whispering under glass. Pines leaned over the water, their branches heavy with snow. Elias photographed before touching anything. The east bank below the bridge, the broken shelf of ice, the place where he had found Bracken's paw marks, already softened by new snowfall. He filled one vial with river water from the public access point, another with snow from the stained edge of the bank. He scraped a small sample of discolored ice into a sterile container, careful not to step too close to the unstable lip. A faint chemical smell rose when he disturbed the slush. He wrote it down. Not strong, bitter, similar to antifreeze. Present near East Bank. He moved slowly downstream. At Millbend Creek he found more signs. A thin foam gathered where the smaller creek fed into the river, not the clean white froth of fast water, but a dull, greasy ring that clung to twigs and dead grass. A fish lay frozen near the edge, its body half buried in snow. Elias photographed it, marked the location, and did not touch it with bare hands. By the time he reached the old access road that led toward Evershade Mine, the sky had brightened into a hard, beautiful blue. Silverpine looked harmless from a distance. A postcard town, a place of church bells, coffee steam, and porch lights glowing early against the cold. But along the river's edge, beauty had begun to feel like a blanket laid over a fever. His phone buzzed. Lenora. "Tell me you're not on mine property," she said when he answered. "Good afternoon to you, too." "Elias? I'm on public access." "Public access where?" "Millbend." A pause, then, "You found something?" "Foam, discolored ice, one dead fish." "Photographed before collection?" "Yes." "Gloves?" "Yes." "Are you annoyed yet?" "Getting there." "Good. Annoyed people are usually alive." He looked toward the road bending up toward the old mine. The gate was distant, barely visible between pines. "I'm not crossing any fences," he said. "I know." "You sounded like you didn't." "I sounded like a woman who has known you long enough to respect your self-control and distrust your shoulders." Despite the cold, Elias almost laughed. "Bring the samples back," she said, "and don't let the river turn you into a crusader before lunch." He ended the call and stood listening. The water moved beneath the ice, soft and persistent. For a moment, Elias imagined the river as some old silver serpent trapped under a frozen shield, carrying poison through its own body, because men in warm offices had decided the cost of honesty was too high. He pushed the thought away. Metaphors did not hold up in court. Samples did. That afternoon, Lenora took him to meet Dr. Miles Harrow. Miles lived at the ragged edge of town, where the last paved road gave up, and the pines resumed their ancient argument with civilization. His house looked less built than accumulated, a low cabin with additions jutting from odd angles, windows crowded with books, and a porch nearly swallowed by rolled maps, snow shovels, and 2 cracked bird feeders. Miles opened the door before Lenora knocked twice. He was thin, about 56, with silver-gray hair that rose from his head in several academic rebellions. His glasses sat low on a long nose. He wore a brown sweater with one elbow patched in darker wool, and in one hand he held a mug of coffee so black it appeared to be making its own weather. "Lenora," he said, "if this is about Mrs. Pritchard's goat again, I have retired from goat-related testimony." "It's water this time." Miles looked past her at Elias. "And you brought a large man. That feels accusatory." "This is Elias Mercer." "I assumed he wasn't the water." Elias said, "Doctor." Miles squinted. "Former military?" Elias did not answer. "Ah, the silence confirms it." Lenora stepped inside without waiting for invitation. "Can we come in, Miles?" "I object to visitors on principle, but yes." His house smelled of coffee, paper, dust, and wood smoke. Maps covered one wall, river basins, old mining lines, watershed charts marked in pencil. The kitchen table had been surrendered entirely to notebooks, sample trays, and mugs in various stages of abandonment. There were enough books stacked on the floor to suggest either scholarship or structural support. Miles examined the vials beneath a desk lamp, then prepared quick preliminary tests with the care of a man pretending not to be interested. At first he muttered, then he stopped muttering. That was when Lenora and Elias exchanged a look. Miles adjusted his glasses and leaned closer over one sample. "Where exactly did you collect this?" Elias opened his notebook. "East Bank below Hawthorne, Millbend Confluence, public access below Evershade Road." Miles held one vial up to the light. A faint sheen clung to the glass. "This is not proof," he said. Lenora crossed her arms. "Nobody said it was?" "I'm saying it before anyone becomes dramatic. Preliminary field chemistry is a lantern, not the sun." He set the vial down. "But yes, there are irregularities." "What kind?" Elias asked. Miles looked at him over the rims of his glasses. "The kind that make retired hydrologists consider becoming unpleasant." He pulled a notepad toward himself and began sketching as he spoke. "Possible glycol compounds. Some metal signatures that would not surprise me near old mine drainage. And something solvent-like. I'd need proper lab confirmation. Chain of custody, more samples. Sediment. Tissue if any affected animals die, though I prefer they don't, for emotional and paperwork reasons." Lenora's face tightened. "Could it be old contamination?" "Yes." Miles tapped the pencil against the paper. "Could also be disturbed waste from old storage. Could be illegal discharge into a forgotten drainage route. Could be runoff worsened by thaw cycles. Could be someone very stupid, very cheap, or very confident." "Clearwater Renewal Group," Elias said. Miles stopped tapping. The name seemed to lower the room temperature by 1 degree. Lenora noticed. "You know them." "I know the language of companies like them." Miles set the pencil down. "Renewal, restoration, future. Words polished so brightly you can't see what they're covering." He turned toward the wall and pulled down an old watershed map. His fingers moved along tributaries, culverts, old industrial markings. "I testified once," he said, quieter now, "in a case where a company insisted dead wetlands were merely seasonally misunderstood. I softened my report because the county needed the jobs." No one spoke. Miles gave a humorless smile. "The jobs lasted 3 years. The water stayed dead much longer." There it was, not confession exactly, not absolution either, just an old wound placed on the table beside the samples. Elias understood that kind of offering. Men like Miles did not say they were ashamed. They handed you a map and hoped you could read the rest. "Can you help?" Elias asked. Miles looked at the vials again. "I can tell you what the water is trying to say," he replied. "But if you want anyone official to listen, you need better procedure than 3 concerned citizens and a poisoned dog." Lenora nodded. "We start with confirmation." "And you," Miles said, pointing his pencil at Elias, "do not go sneaking around the mine like a tragic action figure." Elias looked at Lenora. "Do you hand out scripts?" "She improves them," Miles said. 2 days later, Sheriff Nolan Price asked Elias to meet him outside the old courthouse. Nolan was a broad, quiet man of 50, with a square face, tired brown eyes, and a neatly trimmed mustache that made him look more patient than he probably felt. His winter uniform jacket was zipped to the throat, badge dull under the gray afternoon light. He stood near the courthouse steps, turning a silver lighter over in one hand without lighting anything. The lighter clicked once, closed, clicked again. "You're collecting water samples now," Nolan said. Elias stood beside him, looking across the street toward Mara's diner. "Yes? On public land?" "Yes." "Good. Keep it that way." "I intend to." Nolan studied him. Intentions are easy when no one pushes. A truck passed slowly, tires crunching over packed snow. Across the street, two men outside the hardware store watched Elias and the sheriff for a moment too long, then turned away. Nolan saw it too. "This town is scared," he said. "Of poisoned water?" "Of losing the only thing that sounded like a future in 10 years. He slipped the lighter into his pocket. "Clearwater is promising jobs, road work, tourism, cleanup contracts. Men who haven't had steady work since the mill downsized are hearing paychecks in every speech." "And if the river's being poisoned?" "Then we prove it right." Nolan's voice hardened slightly. "Not loud, right. Because if this turns into accusations without evidence, Clearwater's lawyers will bury it, and half the town will help them shovel." Elias let the words settle. He did not like them. That did not make them false. Nolan stepped down one stair. "I'm not telling you to stop. I'm telling you not to give them a way out." Elias looked toward the north, where the road eventually bent toward the river and the old mine beyond it. "Animals are getting sick." "I know." "People are looking away." "Some are." Nolan's gaze followed his. "Some are looking at their mortgage." That was the uglier truth. Not evil with a polished smile. Not yet. Just fear wearing work boots, standing in grocery aisles, counting winter bills. Elias had seen fear make good people small. He had seen orders make decent men silent. He had seen language turn death into math. For the first time since finding Bracken, he understood that the river was not the only thing contaminated. Something had seeped into Silverpine too, not chemical, but human. A willingness to explain away what hurt to admit. That evening, Lenora released Bracken into Elias's care for temporary monitoring. "Temporary," she said, while handing him medication instructions. Elias took the paper. "You keep using that word like it has authority." "It does when printed." Bracken stood beside them on unsteady legs, wearing a soft temporary collar. His coat had dried fully now, black and gold under the clinic lights, though the fur at his chest still lay uneven where the cold and toxin had punished him. He leaned slightly toward Elias, but did not press against him. Not yet. Lenora crouched and looked into Bracken's face. "No heroics from you either." Bracken blinked. "He understands," Elias said. "He absolutely does not." That was a handsome blink, not informed consent. Elias drove home slowly, Bracken lying across the back seat beneath a blanket. The house near the tree line was dark when they arrived, a simple wooden place with a porch, a woodshed, and windows that reflected the snow like pale mirrors. Inside, Elias lit the stove and prepared a padded bed near the hearth. He placed water beside it, set Bracken's medication on the counter, and stood back. "There," he said. "Best room in the house." Bracken sniffed the bed. Then he walked past it. His legs trembled with the effort, but he continued across the room to the narrow hallway between the front door and Elias's bedroom. There he lowered himself carefully to the floor, turned once, and laid down facing the entrance. Elias stared at him. "No." Bracken closed his eyes. "That's not your post." The scarred ear twitched. Elias stood in the firelight, absurdly outmaneuvered by a convalescent dog. He could have lifted Bracken and moved him back to the bed. He almost did. Then he noticed the angle of the dog's body. Not comfortable, not random, deliberate. Bracken had placed himself between Elias and the door. Weak as he was, poisoned as he had been, the dog had chosen guard duty. The realization did not warm Elias. It humbled him. He sat slowly in the chair near the stove. The fire moved in orange folds behind the glass. Outside, the pines creaked under snow. The house, usually quiet in the way empty places are quiet, now held another breathing presence. Elias looked at Bracken lying in the hall. "You almost died beside that river," he said quietly. "You know that." Bracken did not move. "And now you're guarding my door." A soft breath left the dog. Elias leaned back, rubbing one hand over his face. For years he had made a home out of distance, a clean, orderly fortress. No one needed too much. No one stayed close enough to be lost. He had thought that was wisdom. But Bracken, with his scarred ear and poisoned blood and stubborn little watchpost, seemed to disagree. The dog's tail gave one small thump against the floor. Not much. Enough. Elias looked toward the window, beyond it to the unseen river moving under ice. He had begun with water samples, photographs, careful notes. He would continue that way. No trespassing, no accusations, no old instincts dressed up as justice. But something had changed all the same. The Lark River was no longer an environmental concern in a notebook. It had sent a guard dog to his hallway. And Elias, for the first time in years, did not feel alone in his own house. Bracken's strength returned in quiet increments, not in one bright leap, not like a hero rising from a battlefield, but in the honest, ordinary ways healing preferred. He finished half a bowl without needing Elias's hand beside it. He walked from the stove to the front window without his hind legs trembling. He began to sleep without jerking awake at every sound from the porch. Elias noticed all of it and pretended not to. Lenora noticed Elias noticing and had the mercy not to grin every time. On the 7th day after Bracken came home with him, Elias brought the shepherd back to Lark Valley Veterinary Care for a follow-up. The morning was clean and bright, the kind of Montana winter morning that made the world look newly invented. Sunlight struck the snow outside the clinic and sent silver light through the front windows. Bracken stood beside Elias in the waiting room, leaner than he should have been but steadier now, his yellow-black coat brushed and dry, his old brown leather collar hanging loose around his neck. Lenora crouched to examine him. "You look better." Bracken blinked. "I'm speaking to the dog," she told Elias. "I didn't say anything." "You were preparing to." Elias remained silent, mostly because she was right. Lenora ran careful hands along Bracken's ribs, checked his gums, listened to his heart, and examined the uneven patch of fur on his chest where the skin still bore the memory of whatever had hurt him. Her face remained professional, but the tightness around her eyes had eased. "He's improving," she said. "Still underweight, still recovering, but improving." Bracken leaned into Elias's leg as if the verdict had exhausted him. The clinic bell rang. The woman who entered did not come in like a customer. She came in like weather. She was tall for her age, straight-backed, silver hair cut short beneath a battered gray wool cap. Her coat was old Forest Service green, the sleeves faded at the elbows, with a patch removed from one shoulder, but the outline still visible. Snow clung to her boots. Around her neck hung a pair of old binoculars on cracked leather straps. She carried the cold in with her as if she had been born from a north wind and had only borrowed human shape for convenience. Lenora looked up. "Ruth?" "Doc." The woman's voice was rough, weathered by years of mountain air and saying things only once. Her eyes, pale blue and sharp, moved from Lenora to Elias, then to Bracken. There, they stopped. The change in her face was small but unmistakable. Her jaw tightened. One gloved hand lifted toward the binoculars at her chest, not using them, only touching them as if they were a rosary. "Well, I'll be damned," she said softly. Bracken's ears rose. Elias felt it at once. The dog did not wag. He did not bark, but something in his body changed, like a door opening in a room no one had entered for a long time. Ruth Calder took one slow step forward. "Easy, boy," she said. Not sweetly. Ruth did not seem built for sweetness, but the words carried old knowledge. Bracken stood still, watching her. Lenora glanced between them. You know him?" Ruth crouched with the stiffness of someone whose knees had made a long career of complaining. She did not reach for Bracken immediately. Instead, she studied the scar on his left ear, then the old collar, then the way he held his head. "That scar," she said. "Caught it on barbed wire 2 summers ago above North Ridge." Walter cursed that fence for 20 minutes, then apologized to the dog for using language unfit for the forest. Elias looked down at Bracken. Ruth's hand finally moved to the collar. She turned the worn metal tag between 2 fingers. The letters were scratched nearly flat, but under the clinic light, a faint mark remained. "BK," Ruth murmured. "Bracken Keene." Lenora stood slowly. "Keene?" "Walter Keene's dog." Ruth looked up at Elias now. "Walter was a ranger. Old school, mean to poachers, kind to everything else. He died last fall. Heart gave out at the ranger station before snow came down proper." Bracken lowered his head, not in fear, but in something close to recognition. Ruth touched the scarred ear with 2 fingers. "After the funeral, this one vanished. We thought maybe someone took him in, or he went looking." "Looking for Walter?" Lenora asked quietly. Ruth's mouth pressed into a thin line. "Dogs don't understand death the way we do," which might mean they understand it better. The room settled around that sentence. Elias had thought of Bracken as a stray, then a survivor, then a patient, then, dangerously, a companion. But now another shape entered the story. Bracken had not been wandering aimlessly. He had belonged somewhere, to someone, to a man who guarded the same river, the same woods, the same winter country now making animals sick, a dog with a post abandoned by death. No wonder he had chosen Elias's hallway. No wonder he had placed himself between the door and the sleeping man, weak as a candle, but determined as an oath. Ruth stood. If he was found near the Lark, then he was still patrolling. Elias looked at her. "You say that like it's literal." With Walter's dog, most things were. She looked back at Bracken. He knew half the trails before most seasonal rangers learned where to park. Walter trained him for search, tracking, basic obedience, not official K-9, no fancy certificate, just 2 stubborn creatures making the woods nervous together. Bracken's tail moved once. Ruth saw it, and for the first time, grief cracked her stern face without breaking it. Lenora touched the edge of the exam table. "Ruth, do you still have access to Walter's station files?" "Some, old patrol records, maps. The county took the official things, then forgot the rest existed." Miles Harrow arrived 20 minutes later because Lenora called him, and because the word maps did to Miles what bells did to certain dogs. He entered the clinic carrying his leather map tube and wearing a scarf wrapped badly enough to suggest he had lost an argument with it. "I was promised archival negligence," he announced. "Please tell me nobody organized anything." Ruth eyed him. "You the waterman?" "I prefer hydrologist. I prefer people who answer questions." Miles brightened. "We shall get along terribly." They drove to the old ranger station just before noon. The building sat 2 miles beyond town, tucked near a stand of lodgepole pines where the snow lay deep and clean. It was small, brown, and half forgotten, with a radio mast on one side and a wooden sign nearly buried to the lower edge. Ruth unlocked the door with a key she claimed she had been meaning to return for 6 years, then added that if the county wanted it back, the county could learn to knock politely. Inside, the station smelled of dust, pine boards, mouse traps, and cold paper. Walter Keene's presence lingered not like a ghost, but like an old coat left on a hook, simple, practical, difficult to move. There was a metal desk, a wall of filing cabinets, faded trail notices, and a photograph of a younger Walter standing beside Bracken on a ridge in summer sunlight. Bracken walked to the photograph and stopped. Elias stopped too. In the picture, Walter Keene had been a wiry old man with a white beard, sunken cheeks, and laughing eyes. One hand rested on Bracken's shoulder. The dog in the photograph was fuller, brighter, wearing the same collar now loose around his neck. Bracken lifted his nose toward the image. No sound came from him. Some losses were too old for whining, too deep for barking. Elias stood beside him and did not touch him. Not yet. There were forms of grief a man had no right to interrupt simply because he recognized them. Ruth opened a lower cabinet drawer with a metallic groan. Walter kept copies of everything, said official archives were where paperwork went to be embalmed. Miles knelt beside her, suddenly reverent. I withdraw all jokes. This man understood civilization. They searched for nearly an hour. Old patrol logs, maintenance reports, wildlife counts, complaints about illegal dumping, mostly small and old. Miles sorted maps with increasing focus, muttering to himself as he traced blue lines and red pencil marks. Lenora photographed anything connected to the Lark River. Elias recorded file names, dates, and locations in his waterproof notebook. Then Ruth found a rolled map sealed in a cracked plastic sleeve. "Evershade," she said. Miles turned so quickly he nearly knocked over a stack of field guides. They spread the map across Walter's desk. It was older than the polished brochures Clearwater had been handing out around town. Older than their language of renewal and investment. This map had no pretty colors, only contour lines, drainage marks, culvert numbers, and the blunt honesty of infrastructure drawn by someone who expected water to obey gravity, not politics. Miles bent over it. "Oh," he said. No one moved. That single syllable held more weight than a speech. Lenora leaned in. "What?" Miles tapped a thin dotted line branching from the old mine drainage system. "This is not on the county's public infrastructure map." Ruth frowned. Walter marked that himself. "Looks like a secondary drainage route, old overflow pipe, supposedly sealed here." Miles moved the pencil along the line. But if it wasn't sealed properly, or if someone disturbed the storage pond above it? "It leads where?" Elias asked. Miles continued following the line. His pencil stopped near a bend of the river below Hawthorne Bridge. Elias felt the room become very still. "There," Miles said, "near the east bank." Where Bracken had fallen. The map did not shout. It did not accuse. It simply lay there, yellowed and patient, holding a forgotten vein between mine and river. For Elias, it was worse than a shouted confession. A confession could lie. A map usually did not bother. Lenora took a slow breath. "We need to document this properly." "Yes," Miles said. "Photographs. Chain of custody. We do not remove the original unless Ruth has legal custody." Ruth snorted. "The county forgot it exists." "Neglect is not custody?" "Professor, I dislike you already." "Excellent. Accuracy often has that effect." Elias studied the line again. His old instinct stirred, not toward violence, but toward movement. Go there. See it. Confirm the outlet. Follow the pipe. Find the source. Then Bracken shifted beside him. The dog stood near Walter's photograph, watching Elias. Not pleading, not commanding, simply present. A creature who had lost one handler and nearly lost his own life on the path of that forgotten line. Elias closed his notebook. "We stay legal," he said. Lenora looked at him, and something like relief passed through her face. Miles nodded. A disappointing but wise sentence. They spent the afternoon doing the unglamorous work truth required. Photographs of the map in place, close-ups of Walter's handwritten marks, notes identifying the filing cabinet and drawer, GPS coordinates from public access points. Copies requested through the county archive system, because Miles insisted that if bureaucracy was a beast, one might as well feed it properly before asking it to move. By late afternoon, Ruth led them to the public trail that ran below the old Evershade boundary. The mine itself sat beyond a chain-link fence and locked gate, half hidden by pines and winter glare. Warning signs hung from the fence. Private property, authorized personnel only, Clearwater Renewal Group. Environmental Restoration Site. The words looked clean. The snow beneath them did not. From the trail, they could see where the land dipped toward a shallow ravine. Miles checked the map against the terrain, turning slowly, pencil tucked behind one ear. "If that drainage line still exists," he said, "an outlet or seep could be below that grade. Public side may give us enough to sample legally." Lenora took photographs from the trail. Ruth scanned the tree line with her old binoculars. Elias held Bracken's leash loosely. They had brought the dog because Ruth said he might know the terrain, and Lenora said a short walk would not hurt him if they kept him warm. Elias had nearly refused, then realized he was doing what men often did with healing things, mistaking protection for control. Bracken moved slowly, but with purpose. When they reached a bend where the wind shifted down from the fenced slope, he stopped. It was sudden. His body went rigid. The scarred ear angled forward. His tail lowered, not tucked, but heavy. A tremor passed through his shoulders. Elias felt the leash tighten by half an inch. Then the smell came to him too. Faint, bitter, metallic beneath the cold. Bracken did not bark. That might have been easier. Noise would have given everyone something to do. Instead, he stood in silence, staring through the fence toward a line of brush half buried in snow. Lenora whispered, "Elias." "I know." He crouched beside Bracken, one knee sinking into the snow. He did not pull the leash, did not give a command, did not say the dog's name like a demand. His hand hovered near Bracken's shoulder, close enough to offer steadiness, not close enough to trap. The others remained behind them. Miles, for once, said nothing. Bracken's breathing quickened. His body remembered what his mind could not explain. The riverbank, the taste of poison, the cold closing over him, the old duty to patrol a place that had become dangerous. Elias felt a familiar ache rise in his chest. Not memory exactly, but kinship with a creature whose body had kept score when the world moved on. "You don't have to," Elias said quietly. The words were for Bracken. They were also for himself, though he did not realize it until they had already left him. For years, Elias had believed courage meant advancing, no matter what the body remembered. But that was only one kind of courage, and not always the best one. Sometimes courage meant being allowed to stop, shake, breathe, and still choose your next inch. Bracken stood there for several long seconds. Then, with the smallest motion imaginable, he lifted one front paw and placed it ahead in the snow. One step, no charge, no dramatic surge, just a step. Ruth looked away quickly, as if giving privacy to something holy and embarrassing. Lenora's eyes shone, but her voice stayed steady. "That's enough." Elias nodded. "That's enough," he repeated. Bracken did not go farther. Elias did not ask him to. Miles moved carefully along the public side of the trail and pointed to a patch of stained snow near a drainage depression, still outside the fence line. "Here, we can sample here." Lenora and Miles collected snow and sediment with gloves and sterile tools. Elias photographed the area before and after. Ruth marked the position on a copy of Walter's map. Bracken stood behind Elias now, tired but upright, the leash slack again. As the sun dropped toward the pines, Lenora sent photographs and notes to Tessa Monroe. Tessa called back within 20 minutes. Her voice over the speaker was cool, clipped and practical. "I've reviewed what you sent. I'm not opening a full enforcement action based on scanned ranger maps and field observations, but I will open a preliminary inquiry." Miles mouthed, "Fair." Tessa continued, "I need the original location documented, copies submitted, sample chain clearly recorded, and no one entering Clearwater property. If there's evidence of tampering, threats, illegal hauling, or active discharge, Sheriff Price can coordinate with us to preserve the scene." Elias looked toward the fence. The Clearwater signs shone bright in the fading light. Lenora asked, "So we proceed? How?" "Carefully," Tessa said. "You're not proving a story. You're building a record." The call ended. For a moment, No one spoke. The old mine stood beyond the fence, silent under snow. The public trail lay beneath their boots. The river moved somewhere below them, carrying whatever truth had been hidden long enough to make animals sick. Elias looked down at Bracken. The dog was tired. He leaned slightly against Elias's leg now, not guarding, not searching, simply there. Ruth folded Walter's map copy and slipped it into a waterproof sleeve. "Walter used to say the woods keep receipts," she said. Miles glanced toward the mine. "So does water." Lenora pulled her coat tighter against the wind. Elias said nothing. He did not need to. The thing had changed shape again. It was no longer just a sick dog, or a strange film under the ice, or a few worried people whispering in warm rooms. Now there was a map. There were coordinates. There was an agency name attached to the first line of an official record. The truth had not broken into daylight yet, but it had found the edge of the snow. And this time, Elias thought, they would not let it be buried quietly. The storm came down like it had been saving its strength. By late afternoon, Silverpine had disappeared behind sheets of wind-blown snow. The roofs vanished first, then the road signs, then the dark line of pines beyond town. Porch lights glowed as soft floating circles in the white. Tires hissed through slush, then stopped hissing altogether as most people made the sensible decision to stay indoors and let winter have its temper tantrum in peace. At Lark Valley Veterinary Care, Lenora Vale did not have the luxury of sensible decisions. She had 6 recovering animals in the back room, 1 terrier with a respiratory infection, a barn cat with a stitched flank, an old spaniel recovering from surgery, 2 weak ducks from the riverbank, and a fox too sick to be released but too wild to appreciate medical hospitality. The fox had already bitten through 1 glove and judged everyone involved. Lenora was checking the fox's temperature when the lights flickered. Once, twice. Then the clinic went black. The heater stopped with a heavy sigh. The refrigerator in the lab room clicked off. Somewhere in the kennels, a dog began to whine. Lenora stood very still for 1 second, listening to the building the way a sailor might listen to a ship taking on water. The wind slapped snow against the windows. The emergency battery lights came on in the hallway, weak and blue-white, turning the clinic into a place made of shadows and breath. "All right," she said to the animals, because someone had to sound calm. "Nobody panic unless I do." The fox stared at her from its crate with full confidence that humans had caused this. Lenora grabbed a flashlight and went to the utility closet. The backup generator should have kicked in automatically. It had done so twice that winter without complaint. She opened the panel by the rear hall, reset the switch, waited. Nothing. She tried again. Still nothing. A cold thread slipped down her spine. Outside, the storm roared harder, pressing against the clinic walls. Lenora pulled on her parka, took the big flashlight from under the counter, and stepped out the back door into wind that immediately tried to steal her breath. The generator shed stood 20 feet from the rear entrance. Snow had already drifted against the base. Lenora bent into the weather, boots sinking past her ankles, one hand shielding the flashlight beam. The shed door resisted, then gave with a frozen squeal. Inside, the generator sat silent. At first, she hoped for something simple, a tripped breaker, ice in the vent, a fuel issue, something explainable enough to be insulting. Then her light fell on the transfer box. The cover hung crooked. The lower hinge had been forced. Lenora brought the beam closer. The metal was dented around the latch. One wire had been pulled loose, not torn by wind, not chewed by mice, but removed with rough intention. The damage was clumsy, not professional, but it was enough. But for a moment, her anger was so clean it almost warmed her. Then she thought of the animals inside. The anger folded itself into work. She ran back into the clinic and called Elias. He answered on the first ring. "Power's out," she said. "Backup won't start. Transfer box is damaged." His voice changed, not louder, sharper. "Animals?" "Cold but stable for now. I need heat and light." "I'm coming." "Roads are bad." "I'm still coming." The line went dead. Lenora stood in the emergency glow of the hallway, phone in hand, and let herself breathe once. Only once. Then she started moving. By the time Elias arrived, the clinic had begun to feel colder around the edges. He came through the front door carrying a portable generator in one hand and a coil of heavy extension cable over one shoulder. Bracken entered behind him, wearing a fitted winter coat, his scarred ear cutting a familiar shape against the blue emergency light. The dog was stronger now, but the storm made him cautious. He paused in the doorway, nose lifted, reading the room. Elias's boots left wet prints on the floor. "Where?" he asked. "Back shed." He did not waste time with questions that could wait. He handed Lenora a bundle of thermal blankets. "For the kennels. I've got 2 space heaters in the truck. Battery lanterns, too." Bracken moved down the hallway toward the animal ward, not pulling, not wandering. He stopped outside the kennels and stood there, listening to the frightened sounds inside. A small terrier barked once, then quieted when Bracken turned his head toward it. "Apparently he's on staff now," Lenora said. Elias looked at the dog. "Probationary?" Within 15 minutes, the clinic changed from a failing building into a battlefield of practical kindness. Mara Whitcomb arrived next, wrapped in a brown coat and red scarf, carrying her famous red thermos and 3 paper bags. "I brought soup," she announced, stepping through the door sideways against the wind, coffee and emotional superiority. "Mara, the roads are awful," Lenora said. "Yes, and yet my legs continued to exist." Behind her came Ruth Calder with a box of old wool blankets and a face that suggested the storm had personally offended her. Miles Harrow followed in a hat too large for him, clutching a case of battery lights and muttering that hydrologists were not designed for electrical emergencies. 2 older townspeople came after them. Hank Dobbs from the North Farm with a cage heater, and Alma Reed, the retired postmistress, carrying towels, newspaper, and the solemn authority of a woman who had sorted mail through 3 recessions and 1 roof collapse. Nobody made a speech. That was what struck Lenora. No one said they were saving the town. No one spoke of justice or courage. They simply took what they had and placed it where it was needed. Mara poured soup into mugs. Ruth moved blankets to the kennels. Alma lined the floor beneath the duck crates. Miles held a flashlight for Elias and complained about generator engineering with such devotion that it almost counted as prayer. Outside, Elias worked at the damaged transfer line with gloved hands, headlamp cutting through the snow. He did not repair it fully. He knew better than to pretend a temporary fix was a permanent one. But he isolated the damaged connection, set the portable generator a safe distance from the building, ran the cables correctly, and brought 1 heater online. When the first warm air began moving through the animal ward, Lenora closed her eyes for half a second. Only half. There was too much left to do. The clinic under generator light became a strange little arc in the storm. Yellow lanterns swung from hooks. Shadows moved across the walls. Animals breathed under fresh blankets. Mara forced coffee into anyone whose hands shook. Ruth sat near the fox's crate and told it, "Don't flatter yourself, I've been bitten by better," which seemed to calm them both. Lenora was changing the spaniel's bedding when she noticed Elias in the hallway. He was on one knee beside an old towel, wiping melted snow from the floor before it could spread under the kennel doors. His combat shirt sleeves were pushed to his forearms, olive fabric darkened in places from wet snow. The camouflage arms, the steady hands, the quiet focus, all of it should have made him look like a man at war. Instead, he looked like a man doing chores because no one else had enough hands. Something in her chest ached then, not from fear, from recognition. For years, Lenora had stood in this clinic between compassion and cost. She had learned which medicine she could afford to give away, which bill she could delay, which owner needed mercy more than a lecture. She had been praised for having a big heart by people who never asked how expensive it was to keep one open. Now this man, who could field strip a generator problem in the snow, but struggled to accept soup without looking guilty, was silently mopping her hallway at midnight. It was ridiculous. It was almost holy. Then Bracken growled. Low, not loud enough to alarm the clinic, but sharp enough to cut through the hum of the generator. Elias stood. Bracken was at the rear door, head lowered, ears forward. His body was not panicked. It was focused. Elias moved toward him, one hand low. What is it? Bracken sniffed along the bottom of the door, then looked toward the narrow side window beside it. Snow battered the glass. Beyond it, the rear yard was a blur of white and shadow. Ruth came up behind them with her flashlight. He smellin' the generator? Maybe, Elias said. But Bracken did not go toward the shed. He turned instead toward the rear fence where the wind had piled snow in uneven ridges. Elias opened the back door just enough to step outside. Ruth followed, then Lenora, despite his look suggesting she stay in. Don't start, she said. It's my clinic. The storm hit them hard. Bracken moved slowly along the shoveled path, nose low. Elias kept the leash short but slack, unwilling to force him through the wind. Near the corner of the fence, Bracken stopped and pawed once at the snow. Elias crouched and brushed the powder aside with his glove. A strip of dark fabric was caught on a splintered edge of the fence. He lifted it carefully. Canvas, grease-stained, the kind that might tear from a work jacket. Even through the cold, there was a faint smell of oil beneath something bitter and chemical. Lenora's face went still. Ruth swept her flashlight across the fence. One board had been bent inward slightly, not enough for entry, but enough to suggest someone had grabbed or struck it while moving fast. Elias did not say Clearwater. He did not say sabotage. He did not make the fabric into more than it was. He took a plastic sample bag from his pocket, because Lenora had made him carry them now the way other men carried spare keys, and sealed the cloth inside. Call Nolan, he said. Sheriff Nolan Price arrived 40 minutes later, which in that storm was nearly heroic, though Nolan would rather have eaten his badge than admit it. His cruiser lights painted the snow red and blue before he shut them off out front. He came in with his parka dusted white, mustache rimmed with frost, and the same silver lighter turning once in his hand before disappearing into his pocket. He examined the transfer box. He photographed the forced panel. He took Elias's bagged fabric without touching it directly. Then he stood in the back hall, looking at the animals under blankets, the cables taped safely along the floor, the people warming their hands around Mara's coffee. His expression changed. Not dramatically. Nolan was not a dramatic man. But something in him settled into place. This wasn't storm damage, he said. No, Elias answered. I'll request traffic camera footage from the junction and the clinic road. Lenora crossed her arms. Will there be anything? Snow was thick. Maybe partial, maybe nothing. But we ask. Miles raised a hand from beside the counter. If there is footage, ask quickly. Small-town systems eat their own memory, like elderly goldfish. Nolan stared at him. He means overwrite cycle, Lenora said. I figured. By 2 a.m, the clinic had power enough to keep the animals warm, though not enough for comfort. Comfort had been voted down by the storm and replaced with coffee, blankets, and stubbornness. Mara dozed in a chair beside the terrier. Ruth stood guard near the back door as if daring the weather or anyone else to try again. Miles fell asleep upright, holding a clipboard. Elias found Lenora in the supply room, sitting on an overturned feed bucket, elbows on her knees. The emergency light above her gave the shelves a dim amber glow. Bandages, medicine bottles, spare collars, and folded towels surrounded her like the small architecture of a life spent repairing what others brought broken. You all right? He asked. She laughed once without much humor. That depends on whether you mean medically, financially, emotionally, or in the grand cosmic sense. Dealer's choice. She looked up at him. For once, she did not have a joke ready. I'm tired, Elias. The words came out plainly. That made them heavier. I can keep animals alive through infection, frostbite, neglect, and people's bad decisions. I can stretch $1 until it begs for mercy. I can smile while someone tells me they'll pay next month when we both know next month is a mythical country. She rubbed both hands over her face. But standing between mercy and a ledger every day wears a person thin. Elias leaned against the shelf opposite her. I know something about holding a post nobody sees. Lenora lowered her hands. He did not explain. He did not need to. The room seemed to understand enough. After a while, she said, You know what's annoying? I suspect I'm involved. You are very useful in a crisis. That's annoying? It is when a woman is trying not to like you more than is practical. Elias looked down. A faint smile moved across Lenora's tired face. There, I said something alarming. You may now pretend to inspect that shelf. He did exactly that. She laughed softly, and for the first time that night, the clinic felt warmer than the generator could account for. Near dawn, the first lab report came through. Miles was awake instantly, which suggested he had not been asleep so much as temporarily deactivated. Lenora opened the email on her office computer, running on generator power. Elias stood behind her. Nolan remained by the door, arms crossed. The report was preliminary but clear enough to pull silence over the room. Bracken's blood work showed traces consistent with toxic exposure. The same chemical markers appeared in samples from the ducks and the ranch dog Lenora had treated earlier. The water and sediment samples from near Millbend and below the Evershade public access carried matching patterns, glycol-related compounds, elevated metals, and solvent residues. Miles read the report twice. This connects exposure, he said carefully. It does not yet prove source or responsible party. But it's the same family of contamination, Lenora said. Yes. Miles removed his glasses, cleaned them with the edge of his sweater, and put them back on. The river and the animals are telling the same story. Nolan's phone buzzed before anyone could answer. He stepped into the hall, listened, then returned with his expression tightened. Traffic camera at the junction caught partial footage, he said. Storm blocked most of it, but there's a truck passing near the clinic road at 11:43 p.m. No clean plate, but dispatch matched the side marking to a local subcontractor. Elias felt the room sharpen. Nolan continued. Vehicle registered through a hauling outfit that's done contract work for Clearwater's cleanup site. Driver associated with that route is Dale Brenner. Mara, who had appeared in the doorway with coffee, went quiet. I know Dale, she said. His wife's been sick. Nolan nodded. He's 58, been taking whatever hauling jobs he can get. Ruth's face hardened. Hard times don't cut wires. No, Nolan said. But they explain why a man might tell himself not to ask what's in the tank. Bracken stood at the office doorway, his yellow-black coat catching the weak light. He looked from face to face, then moved to Elias's side and leaned gently against his leg. Not guarding this time. Anchoring. Elias rested one hand on the dog's neck. The storm outside had begun to loosen. Dawn pressed pale and cold against the windows. Snow still fell, but softer now, as if the sky had tired of its own fury. The clinic smelled of coffee, wet wool, antiseptic, warm animals, and the faint electrical bite of a generator that had carried them through the dark. They did not have the whole truth. Not yet. They had a damaged transfer box, a strip of greasy fabric, partial footage, matching toxic markers, a driver's name, a town beginning to witness what silence cost. Lenora looked at Elias. He saw exhaustion in her face, and fear, and something steadier beneath both. So, she said quietly, now it becomes real. Elias looked toward the animal ward, where the creatures under blankets breathed, because enough people had come out into a storm with soup, cables, towels, and stubborn hearts. No, he said. Lenora waited. It was real before. His hand tightened gently in Bracken's fur. Now people have to admit it. Clearwater Renewal Group chose the warmest room in town. Silver Pine Hall had been built in another century by men who believed a town needed a place large enough for dances, arguments, funerals, and voting machines. Its floorboards creaked under every bootstep. Its walls held framed photographs of harvest fairs, snowplow crews, and high school basketball teams from years when half the current population had better knees and worse hair. That evening, the hall glowed with strings of yellow lights and the soft heat of old radiators working beyond their dignity. Outside, snow fell in slow flakes, not violent now, but steady, as if winter had decided to sit in judgment. Pickup trucks lined the street. People came in stamping boots, brushing snow from shoulders, murmuring to neighbors. Some carried hope, some carried suspicion. Most carried both, and did not know which one weighed more. At the front of the hall, Clearwater had arranged a display table with glossy posters. A cleaner Lark River, new jobs for Silver Pine, restoring the past, building the future. The words were printed over bright images of trails, river walks, skaters, renovated storefronts, and smiling families who did not live in Silver Pine and had probably never smelled a frozen culvert in February. Graham Voss stood beside the display like he had been designed to match it. He was 49, tall, polished, and calm in a charcoal wool coat that looked expensive enough to make Snow apologize before landing on it. His hair, dark blonde with silver at the temples, was combed neatly back. He smiled often, but never carelessly. Every expression seemed measured, poured into the room at the proper temperature. Elias Mercer watched him from the side aisle and understood immediately why people listened. Graham did not look like a man hiding poison. He looked like a man who could explain poison as a difficult but necessary stage of progress. Bracken stood beside Elias, stronger now, though still lean from illness. His yellow-black coat had regained some shine, but the fur across his chest and lower neck grew shorter and lighter where the toxin had marked him. Around his neck hung the old brown collar that had once belonged to Walter Keene's dog, the tag worn nearly smooth beneath the hall lights. The shepherd did not pull toward the crowd. He stood close to Elias's left leg, steady and watchful, the old scar along his ear visible whenever he turned his head. Lenora stood near the front row with a folder pressed to her chest. She wore a dark coat over her clinic scrubs, as if she had come straight from work because, in truth, she had. Miles Harrow sat behind her, surrounded by papers, and looking offended by the cheerful font on Clearwater's posters. Ruth Calder leaned against the wall near an exit, arms folded, binoculars still hanging from her neck because Ruth apparently believed indoor meetings were simply outdoor surveillance with worse air. Tessa Monroe stood near Sheriff Nolan Price at the edge of the stage. Her Navy field jacket bore the insignia of the Montana Department of Environmental Quality. She held a clipboard against her side, not like a prop, but like a shield. Her face was composed, sharp-eyed, unreadable. Nolan, in full winter uniform, watched the room more than the stage. His hands rested loosely near his belt, though every now and then one thumb brushed the small silver lighter in his pocket. At 7 sharp, Graham Voss stepped forward. "Good evening, Silver Pine." His voice was warm, not loud. He did not need loud. "Thank you for coming out in this weather. I know many of you have questions. I know change can feel uncertain. But Clearwater Renewal Group believes this town is standing at the edge of an extraordinary opportunity." Behind Elias, someone murmured, "Jobs?" Someone else answered, "If it's real?" Graham continued as if he had heard neither, though Elias suspected he heard everything. He spoke of employment, of restoring the Evershade site, of safe trails and a winter river walk, of partnerships with local businesses, of tax revenue, of bringing visitors back to Main Street. His words fell like warm blankets over cold worries, and Silver Pine wanted to be warmed. That was the dangerous part. Elias saw men from the closed mill listening with hard, hungry attention. He saw shop owners who had survived 3 bad winters leaning toward the promise of foot traffic. He saw ranchers with worn coats and careful faces. People did not become gullible because they were foolish. Sometimes they became hopeful because desperation had stripped them of better luxuries. Then Graham shifted. "I understand there have been concerns raised," he said, turning slightly toward Lenora's side of the hall. "Concerns about wildlife, water quality, and recent unfortunate incidents involving animals. We take all environmental concerns seriously." Miles whispered, "That sentence has been washed and reused in 9 states. Lenora gave him a look. Graham smiled gently. "But we must be careful not to let fear outrun fact. Winter is hard on wildlife. Old mining regions are complex. Our project is part of the solution, not the problem." A few people nodded. A few did not. Tessa stepped forward when Graham finished. She did not smile. She did not perform. Her calm made the room quieter than his charm had. "My name is Tessa Monroe," she said. "I'm with Montana Department of Environmental Quality. A preliminary inquiry has been opened regarding water conditions near the Lark River and the Evershade site. That does not mean a conclusion has been reached. It means there are enough documented concerns to review the matter properly." Graham's smile remained in place. Only his eyes changed. Lenora rose next. She did not walk to the front like someone who wanted attention. She walked like someone who had decided the cost of silence had become higher than the cost of speaking. "I'm not here to make accusations beyond my evidence," she said. Her voice carried, clear but not theatrical. "I'm here because I have treated multiple animals in recent weeks with signs consistent with toxic exposure. A fox found near Millbend Creek, 2 ducks from the riverbank, a ranch dog from the North Branch, and Bracken." At his name, Bracken's ear lifted. Some heads turned toward him. Lenora opened the folder and held up photographs. Not cruel ones, not sensational. Clinical, careful, and somehow worse because of that. A frost-burned paw, inflamed gums, a patch of damaged skin, a vial label, a riverbank marked with coordinates. Preliminary lab results show overlapping chemical markers between affected animals and samples taken from legal public access points near the river. This does not prove who is responsible, but it proves these cases should not be dismissed as random winter hardship. A man near the front crossed his arms. "So what are we supposed to do? Shut down the only project bringing work here because some animals got sick?" The room tightened. Lenora did not flinch. "No," she said. "You're supposed to ask why animals are getting sick before the people who depend on that river do." Silence followed. Not agreement, not yet. But the sentence reached places a chart could not. Miles stood with several papers in hand, looking as if he would rather be lecturing rocks. He cleared his throat. "I will attempt to be brief, a historic sacrifice on my part." A few people laughed despite themselves. He pointed to a simplified map projected on the wall. "Water moves downhill. This remains unpopular but true. The old Evershade drainage system includes routes not clearly represented in current public infrastructure records. Some of those routes, if compromised or disturbed, could carry contamination toward the Lark." Graham lifted a hand politely. "Dr. Harrow, Clearwater's engineers have assured us—" "Engineers are wonderful creatures when permitted to tell the truth," Miles interrupted. "I am discussing maps, samples, and gravity. Gravity has no shareholders." More laughter, sharper this time. Ruth then stepped forward with Walter Keene's copied map in a plastic sleeve. She did not stand behind the microphone. She looked uncomfortable near it, as if it might bite. "Walter marked this before he died," she said. "He spent 30 years walking those ridges. If he drew a drainage line, it was because he saw water move there." Graham's expression softened with professional sympathy. "With respect, old hand-marked maps are not regulatory documents." Ruth stared at him. "No," she said. "They're memory. Sometimes memory is what paperwork tries to bury." The room shifted. Not much. Enough. Elias felt Bracken lean against his leg. He had not planned to speak. That had been his agreement with himself. Lenora had the medical facts. Miles had the water. Ruth had the map. Tessa had the legal frame. Nolan had authority. Elias had no desire to become the man at the center of the room. But then he looked at the people of Silverpine and saw what the meeting had become: a fight between polished promise and inconvenient truth. Truth was losing style points. He stepped forward with Bracken. The hall quieted in a different way this time. People knew Elias, or thought they did. The quiet veteran, the man who fixed things and left before being thanked, the man who ate at Mara's diner on Thursdays and never sat with his back to the door. They knew fragments, and towns were good at making whole statues out of fragments. Elias stopped near the front, one hand resting lightly on Bracken's back. "I found him under Hawthorne Bridge," he said. No microphone at first, just his voice, low and steady. His body was cold, his breathing was almost gone. There was foam at his mouth. He had been fighting whatever got into him for more than one morning. He paused. Bracken stood still. "I'm not asking you to choose me over Clearwater. I'm not asking you to choose a dog over jobs." Elias looked around the room, letting his gaze settle on faces instead of the crowd. "I'm asking you to look at what's in front of us before we sign away the right to ask questions." No one moved. If a river can make a dog collapse in the snow, how long before it teaches the rest of us to bow our heads and call it progress? The words did not explode. They sank. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then Mara Whitcomb stood near the back with her red thermos in one hand like a ceremonial torch. "My diner needs tourists," she said. "I need people coming through town. I need them hungry and preferably generous." A few people chuckled. But nobody drives 3 hours to visit a town famous for poisoning its own river. And if they do, I don't want to feed them. That broke something open. An older fisherman named Carl Ames spoke next, saying he had found more dead fish near the bend than in any winter he remembered. The owner of the garage admitted he had serviced a tanker truck that smelled like a chemical closet set on fire. Alma Reed, the retired postmistress, said she had seen complaint letters addressed to the county sit unanswered on a clerk's desk for weeks. Not proof by itself. But voices. One by one, the room began to remember what it had noticed and buried beneath worry. Graham Voss raised both hands, still smiling. "I respect the passion in this room, but passion cannot replace verified facts. Clearwater is prepared to cooperate fully with any lawful review." Tessa's phone buzzed. She looked down. Her face did not change much, but Nolan saw enough to step closer. Before Tessa could speak, the hall doors opened. A man stepped in from the snow. Dale Brenner looked smaller than his name had sounded. He was 58, heavy-shouldered, with a work jacket stained by oil and road salt. His cap was twisted in both hands. His face was red from cold except around the mouth, where it had gone pale. Snow melted on his thinning gray-blond hair. He looked at the crowd once, then down at the floor, as if the boards might offer him a place to vanish. Mara whispered, "Oh, Dale." Nolan moved toward him. "Dale, you need to talk to me outside?" Dale shook his head. "No," he said. His voice was hoarse. "If I go outside, I won't come back in." The hall went silent. Dale looked toward Lenora, then Elias, then the dog. Bracken stood beside Elias, ears forward but body calm. Dale swallowed. "I drove that route," he said. "To Evershade. Nights mostly, not Clearwater trucks. Subcontract hauling." Graham's smile faded by a fraction. "Mr. Brenner," he said carefully, "I would strongly advise you not to misrepresent confidential logistics." Dale flinched at the sound of his name, but kept talking. "They told me it was treated holding water. Non-hazardous. Said the paperwork was handled. Said not to ask questions because asking slows contracts." His hands tightened around the cap. "First few times I believed it. Then I smelled it." No one interrupted now. "My wife's sick," Dale said, shame cracking through the words. "Bills don't care if you sleep. They just keep coming. I told myself I was only driving. I told myself I didn't make whatever was in those tanks." He looked toward Lenora. "I went by the clinic that night. I was supposed to scare you off. Just scare. Cut the generator transfer enough to make trouble, not put animals in danger. I didn't know how bad it'd get." Lenora's face had gone pale, but she stayed standing. Elias felt old anger rise in him, quick and clean. Bracken leaned into his leg. Not hard, just enough. A warm, living weight. Elias lowered his hand to the dog's neck. He felt Bracken's pulse under his fingers and let the anger move through without giving it the wheel. Dale looked at Elias as if expecting judgment. Elias gave him none that would fit in words. Nolan stepped forward. His voice was calm, but no longer soft. "Dale, I'm going to need you to come with me and make a formal statement. You may be facing charges related to property damage and illegal transport. You understand that?" Dale nodded once. "I do." Graham Voss turned toward the room. "Clearwater cannot be held responsible for unverified actions by an independent subcontractor. We will cooperate fully." Tessa finally spoke. "Mr. Voss," her voice cut cleaner than a shout, "my field team just confirmed an active warm discharge from an old drainage outlet below the Evershade site. We're requesting an emergency inspection order tonight. I recommend Clearwater preserve all records, transport logs, subcontractor communications, and site access data." For the first time, Graham had no ready warmth. He found it a second later, but the room had already seen the gap. "I'm sure this is a misunderstanding," he said. Nobody answered him. That was the victory. Not handcuffs, not shouting, not a villain dragged away while everyone cheered. Just a roomful of people who had finally stopped filling silence for him. Nolan escorted Dale toward the side room, not roughly. Dale walked like a man carrying all the weight he had postponed. When he passed Bracken, the dog did not growl. He only watched him. That somehow made Dale look more ashamed. At the back table, Mara took out a clipboard. "Well," she said, voice tight but steady, "if we're done pretending the river caught a seasonal flu, I made a petition." Miles looked at her. "Of course you did. I run a diner, Professor. Half of democracy happens over bad pens." The petition called for immediate suspension of Clearwater's local project pending the state investigation, preservation of all environmental records, and public release of water testing updates. People hesitated at first. Then Alma Reed signed, then Carl Ames, then Hank Dobbs, then others came forward in heavy coats, work gloves, church shoes, diner aprons, and oil-stained jackets. Not everyone. A few left without signing. One man cursed under his breath about jobs and slammed the door behind him. Silverpine did not become brave all at once, but it began to stop being afraid in public. Elias stood beside Lenora as names filled the page. She looked tired enough to fold in half, but her eyes were bright. "You didn't hit him," she said quietly. He glanced toward Graham Voss, who was speaking in a low voice to a man in a tailored coat near the posters. "I thought about it." "I know." Bracken pressed his head lightly against Elias's hand. Elias looked down at him. "Dog voted against it." Lenora's mouth curved. "A wise civic participant." Outside, snow kept falling on Silverpine Hall, on the trucks, on the road to Evershade, on the river moving beneath its wounded ice. Inside, beneath old photographs and yellow lights, the town wrote its name against silence. Not all the names, but enough to begin. Silverpine did not heal in a single sunrise. No town did. No river did. A few weeks after the meeting at Silverpine Hall, winter still held the valley in both hands. Snow lay thick on rooftops and fence rails. Icicles shone from porch eaves like glass teeth. The pines beyond town still stood black-green and solemn beneath white crowns, and the Lark River still moved under broken plates of ice, slow and cold and wounded. But the light had changed. Elias Mercer noticed it first on a Tuesday morning while standing near Hawthorne Bridge with Bracken at his side. The sun rose through a thin veil of cloud, not bright enough to melt anything, but bright enough to turn the snow blue at the edges and gold where it touched the bridge rails. The same bridge where he had once heard a faint scrape beneath the wind now stood over a river marked with warning signs and orange survey flags. The signs were not beautiful. Water testing in progress. Avoid contact below ice line. Environmental review area. They looked harsh against the white riverbank, like bandages on a face. But Elias did not hate them. For years he had known wounds hidden under clean clothes. He knew what happened when damage was polished over too soon. A warning sign was not shame. It was honesty nailed into the snow. The Evershade mine had been sealed behind state barriers and county tape. Tessa Monroe's team had confirmed an active discharge from the old drainage route, and emergency containment had stopped the warm seep from reaching the main channel. Clearwater's local operations had been suspended pending investigation. Project funds were under review. Subcontractor records were being pulled apart by people who cared more for dates, signatures, and transport logs than Graham Voss had ever expected. Graham had not been dragged away in disgrace. That would have been too simple, and real life rarely gave evil such theatrical manners. He had lawyers now, statements, careful denials, claims of subcontractor misconduct and legacy contamination. There would be hearings, filings, delays, and men in expensive coats saying complexity, as if the word itself were a locked gate. But the discharge had stopped, and so had the town's old habit of lowering its voice. That was something. Bracken stood beside Elias on the bridge, wearing no winter coat now, only his old brown collar. His yellow-black fur had thickened again. The scar on his left ear remained, and the shorter patch of fur on his chest would probably always show if the light struck it right. But his body had filled out. His stance was steady. His eyes, dark amber and watchful, tracked the river below. He lowered his head and sniffed the wind rising from the water. Elias looked down at him. "Anything to report?" Bracken gave him the grave silence of a dog burdened by municipal responsibility. "I'll put that down as cautious optimism." The tail moved once. Not a wag exactly. A vote. Elias had begun running again, though running had changed. He did not pound across Hawthorne Bridge as if the past were chasing him. He moved slower now, sometimes walking when Bracken paused to listen, sometimes stopping altogether to watch water slip beneath ice. The road beneath his boots no longer felt like an escape route. It felt like a way home. By mid-morning, Lark Valley Veterinary Care was louder than usual. Lenora had turned the old storage room into a temporary rehabilitation ward for animals affected by contamination. It was not elegant. The shelves had been cleared, the walls scrubbed, and a heater installed with donations from half the town and a suspiciously large, anonymous contribution Mara insisted had come from a wealthy admirer, despite everyone knowing Mara's diner cash box had been short that week. There were recovering ducks in a large pen lined with towels. A young raccoon slept in a crate after treatment, paws curled like tiny criminal hands. The old spaniel from the generator night had returned for a checkup and was being praised for surviving both surgery and his owner's singing. Lenora moved among them with sleeves rolled, hair loosely braided, stethoscope around her neck. She looked tired, but it was a different tired than before. Not the hollow kind, the earned kind, the kind that came when work was still heavy, but no longer lonely. Miles Harrow sat at a folding table in the corner with a laptop, 3 notebooks, and a mug of coffee dark enough to discourage conversation. He had somehow become the unofficial keeper of river data and complained about it every day with the devotion of a man who secretly needed something to complain about. "I hate spreadsheets," he announced as Elias entered. Lenora did not look up from checking a duck's bandage. "You named the last one." That was different. A spreadsheet called January Water Samples lacks dignity. Lady Chloride of Millbend has presence. Elias hung his coat by the door. How is Lady Chloride? Less alarming than Baron Glycol, though both remained socially unacceptable. Bracken trotted to the edge of the duck pen and sat down. The ducks eyed him with collective suspicion, Lenora looked over. "Bracken, no supervising the patients." Bracken blinked. "He thinks he works here," Elias said. "He does. He's just unpaid." Mara arrived 10 minutes later with 2 trays of soup jars packed for a fundraiser. She came through the door wrapped in her red scarf, cheeks pink, expression triumphant. "Vegetable barley," she declared, a warm slap in the face of corporate greed. Miles lifted a finger. "Technically, soup lacks the kinetic structure of a slap." Mara stared at him. "Professor, if you ever correct my soup again, you'll learn about kinetics." Lenora laughed. The sound filled the clinic easily. Elias watched her for a moment from beside the supply shelf, not in the old careful way, as if affection were a hazard to assess. Just watched. Lenora caught him, and instead of deflecting, she smiled. A small thing, a brave thing, the kind of expression that asked nothing and offered enough. Later that afternoon, Elias worked behind his house. The old shed at the edge of his property had once held broken tools, spare lumber, and boxes he had never unpacked after moving to Silverpine. For a long time, that had suited him. A shed full of closed things was an honest extension of the man who owned it. Now the doors stood open. He had cleaned out the dust and old nails, repaired the roofline, insulated the walls, and installed 2 wide pens with raised beds. Not a shelter. Not yet. Just a temporary place where an animal could rest after treatment, where Lenora could send a recovering dog that needed warmth and quiet before finding a permanent home. Bracken lay in the snow nearby, watching Elias measure a board. "You realize," Elias said, marking the wood with a pencil, "that this was supposed to be a storage shed." Bracken rested his chin on his paws. "Now it has better bedding than I do." The dog sighed, unmoved by human sacrifice. Ruth Calder appeared at the edge of the yard without warning, which Elias had learned was simply how former rangers entered scenes. She carried a stack of old trail signs under one arm and wore her faded green coat, binoculars swinging against her chest. "You need one for the door," she said. "I do?" "You're making a halfway house for strays and poisoned raccoons. It requires a sign. Otherwise, it's just a man collecting mammals in a shed." "That sounds worse when you say it." "It should?" She handed him a piece of sanded wood. Burned into it in Ruth's blunt block letters were the words, "Walter's Rest." Elias stared at it. Ruth looked toward Bracken. "Don't get sentimental. It's practical. Dog ought to know the old man still has a post somewhere." Bracken stood and walked over. He sniffed the sign once, then sat beside it. Ruth looked away toward the trees. "Well, that's settled." Elias ran his thumb along the burned letters. Walter Keene had never met him. Yet the old ranger's hand seemed to reach through map lines, river paths, and one stubborn dog, leaving Elias with a duty that did not feel like a burden. "Thank you," Elias said. Ruth shrugged. "Don't ruin it with feelings." "I'll try not to." "Fail quietly if you must." By Saturday morning, the town had begun something that was not official enough to be called a program and too stubborn to be called a habit. They gathered at Hawthorne Bridge. Not everyone came. Some still believed the project suspension would hurt Silverpine more than it helped. Some stayed home because shame had made them quieter than fear ever had. Some were angry, and some were simply tired. But enough came. Mara brought soup and coffee. Miles brought labeled sample kits and complained when anyone touched them without gloves. Ruth led a small group of adults along the bank, teaching them how to read animal tracks, watercolor, and where not to step unless they wanted to become a cautionary tale with wet socks. Tessa's team posted collection points and explained what would be tested. Nolan stood near the road, not directing the gathering so much as making sure it had room to exist. Elias arrived with Bracken beside him. Lenora came a few minutes later, carrying a clipboard and wearing a cream sweater under a long gray-blue coat. Her chestnut hair was braided over one shoulder. Snowflakes caught in it and melted there. They walked together to the middle of the bridge. For a while, they did not speak. Below them, the lark moved beneath the ice. Not clean yet, not healed, but moving. Lenora rested her gloved hands on the railing. I used to think if I just worked hard enough, I could hold the whole place together. Elias stood beside her. The clinic? The clinic, the animals, people's guilt, people's bills, my own stubborn belief that needing help was some sort of design flaw. He looked at her. That sounds exhausting. It was, she smiled faintly. You would know something about that. Bracken sat between them, facing the river like a judge presiding over water. Elias watched the current slide through a dark seam in the ice. I spent a long time making sure nobody could need me too much. Did it work? No. Lenora's smile softened. He drew a breath. The cold entered his lungs cleanly, almost painfully. I was afraid, he said. The admission surprised him with its plainness. Lenora did not turn it into a grand moment. She only waited. I loved working with dogs, he continued. More than I admitted. They trusted without bargaining, gave everything. And I saw too many treated like equipment. Useful until they weren't. Men, too. He looked down at Bracken. After I left, I told myself distance was mercy. If I didn't attach, I couldn't lose. If I didn't love anything too much, grief would have nowhere to land. Lenora's voice was quiet. And did grief respect the boundary? He gave a low breath that might have been a laugh in warmer weather. No, it just waited outside the fence and barked. Bracken's ear twitched at the word. Lenora looked at Elias, eyes bright in the winter light. I've been afraid too, she said, not of loving, of leaning. I built a life around being the person others could bring broken things to. Animals, bills, worry, shame. I thought if I leaned back, even a little, everything would fall. It didn't. No? She looked toward the people gathering below the bridge, Mara arguing with Miles over sample labels, Ruth correcting someone's boot placement, Nolan helping an older man down a snowy slope. It turns out some people can hold weight without making you smaller. Elias turned his hand on the railing, palm up. Lenora looked at it for one beat, then placed her gloved hand in his. There was no music, no sweeping declaration, no sudden thaw. The river did not burst into light and the snow did not stop falling to applaud. It was better than that. It was real. Bracken looked at their joined hands, then placed one front paw firmly on Elias's boot. Elias glanced down. Is that approval? Lenora's mouth curved. I think it's legal supervision. Good. I'd hate to proceed without canine authorization. Bracken remained solemn, as if the responsibility of their happiness was heavy, but manageable. Below the bridge, Mara shouted, If you two are done looking poetic, I need someone tall to hang this banner. Lenora laughed, and Elias felt the sound move through him like warmth reaching a room long closed. The banner was simple, painted by Alma Reed in blue letters. Lark River Watch. Saturdays at 8. No one called it a movement. That would have embarrassed them. No one called it redemption. That would have been too heavy to carry before coffee. They simply gathered, tested, cleaned, recorded, and came back the next week. That was how healing entered Silverpine. Not like thunder, like footsteps returning. In the weeks that followed, Walter's Rest took in its first recovering dog, a thin collie mix found near a drainage ditch but expected to survive. Lenora's clinic kept a public board with water updates. Miles's ridiculous spreadsheet names became town gossip. Ruth trained volunteers to monitor trails. Mara's soup fundraiser paid for testing gloves, animal bedding, and one very necessary coffee maker that Miles called the only functioning public institution left. Graham Voss's lawyers continued to issue statements. The river continued to need care. The town continued to argue. But now arguments happened in daylight, with records on the table and people willing to sign their names. On the last morning of the chapter of his life, Elias had not known he was living. He stood again on Hawthorne Bridge, with Lenora on one side and Bracken on the other. Snow fell lightly. The Lark River moved below, wounded but no longer abandoned to silence. The water carried the faint sounds of the gathered town, shovels scraping ice from the bank, Miles protesting improper labeling, Mara laughing from the soup table, Ruth scolding someone for stepping directly over deer tracks, Nolan's low voice giving directions, Lenora's breath beside him, Bracken's steady breathing in the cold. Elias rested one hand on the bridge rail. Once he had believed the best he could do was survive without needing much and without being needed in return. It had seemed disciplined, clean, safe. But life, in its strange mercy, had sent him a poisoned dog beside a frozen river. Not to give him a mission shaped like war, to give him a way back into the world. Bracken leaned against his leg. Lenora's hand found his again. The river under Hawthorne Bridge did not sing yet, not fully. But beneath the ice, beneath the warning signs and sample flags, beneath the long work still ahead, it had begun to breathe. And Silverpine, imperfect and frightened and stubborn as a winter fern under snow, breathed with it. Sometimes healing does not begin with a grand miracle. Sometimes it begins with one wounded life placed in our path, asking us not to look away. Elias did not save the whole river in one day. Lenora did not heal every creature at once. Bracken did not erase the town's fear. But together they chose truth over silence, care over convenience, and hope over giving up. Maybe that is where grace often starts, not in perfect answers, but in small, faithful steps. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what Bracken's journey meant to you. And if you believe stories like this still matter, please subscribe and walk with us into the next one. May you find courage for the burden in front of you and peace for the wounds still learning how to heal.